The corridor was meant to be silent by now. In the private wing of Kensington Palace, lights dim automatically at precisely 10 o'clock. Footsteps soften. Doors close with careful restraint. Even the antique clocks seem to tick with discipline. Protocol does not simply govern the palace. It breathes through it. And yet, on this particular night, something disturbed the rhythm. A sound, faint at first, then unmistakable. Crying. Not the restless murmur of a child resisting sleep. Not a fleeting nightmare soothed by a nursemaid's whisper. This was different. This was sustained. Fragile. Strained. Catherine, Princess of Wales, known to most as Kate, paused mid-step inside her sitting room. The fire had burned low, casting amber shadows along the paneled walls. She had been reviewing briefing notes for an early engagement, agricultural sustainability, a speech she had nearly memorized. But none of it mattered now. The crying echoed again, and a mother does not mistake that sound. She moved toward the door, without summoning staff, without ringing the bell. The corridor outside stretched long and hushed, lined with portraits of monarchs whose painted gazes had witnessed centuries of triumph and quiet suffering. The carpet softened her steps, but her pulse thundered in her ears. "Charlotte," she whispered to herself. The sound came from deeper within the private family quarters, past the threshold where public grandeur yields to domestic sanctuary. Princess Charlotte's room door was slightly ajar. That alone was unusual. Kate approached slowly. The crying had softened to uneven breaths, the kind that follow restraint, the kind that follow someone trying very hard to be brave. She pushed the door gently. Charlotte sat upright in bed, small hands clenched in the sheets, cheeks flushed, eyes wet but defiant in their attempt not to weep further. The bedside lamp glowed dimly. "Darling," Kate said softly, crossing the room in 3 steps. "Why are you awake?" Charlotte hesitated. And that hesitation said everything. "I'm fine, Mama," she whispered, too quickly. Kate sat beside her, brushing hair from her daughter's face. The room smelled faintly of lavender oil and old wood polish. Familiar, safe, but something was wrong. Charlotte's composure was learned, a royal instinct already forming, that frightened Kate more than tears would have. "You're not fine," Kate replied gently. "Tell me what happened." Charlotte's lower lip trembled. She looked toward the door, instinctively, as though the walls themselves might overhear. "It was earlier," she murmured. "Earlier." Kate felt her breath tighten. "Earlier when?" she asked, though she already sensed the answer would complicate everything. "This afternoon," Charlotte said. "After lessons." A pause. She said I mustn't behave that way, that I must remember who I am. Kate's spine stiffened slightly. "Who said that?" Charlotte swallowed. "Grandmama." The word hung in the air like a fragile artifact. "Grandmama." "Camilla." Kate's expression did not change. Years of public composure ensured that. But inside, something shifted. "What exactly happened, sweetheart?" Charlotte's fingers tightened around the sheet. She said I embarrassed the family, that I laughed too loudly in front of guests. A tremor in her voice. She said a princess must learn restraint, and that tears are weakness. Kate's hand stilled. Tears are weakness. The phrase echoed with severity that felt older than the room itself. Did she raise her voice? Kate asked carefully. Charlotte nodded once, and then she told the staff to leave. The air seemed to thin. "Were you alone with her?" Another nod. Silence settled between them. Heavy, deliberate. Kate drew her daughter into her arms. Charlotte resisted for a fraction of a second. Not out of distance, but out of learned discipline, then collapsed into the embrace. "I didn't mean to embarrass anyone," Charlotte whispered. "Oh, my darling." Kate breathed. Joy is never embarrassment. The camera of memory drifts back now to earlier that day, a formal luncheon, polished silver, controlled smiles. Charlotte had laughed, freely unfiltered, at a story one of the equerries had told about a corgi chasing ceremonial plumes. It had been brief, innocent, but in rooms layered with tradition, even laughter carries weight. Hours later, somewhere between official tea and scheduled correspondence, Camilla had requested a private word with her granddaughter. Protocol allowed it. No one questioned it. But now, In the dim quiet of the corridor, a different question formed. Why had no one mentioned it? Why had no report been logged? Inside the palace, information moves like carefully rationed currency. Nothing simply vanishes. Kate kissed Charlotte's forehead and settled her back against the pillows. You did nothing wrong, she said firmly, yet softly enough to preserve calm. And you will never be alone with something that frightens you again. Do you understand? Charlotte nodded. May I stay here tonight? She asked. Kate hesitated only long enough to consider optics and dismissed them. Yes, she said. She remained beside her daughter until breathing steadied into sleep. Only then did she rise and step back into the corridor. The palace felt different now, quieter, as though it knew something had occurred and chose not to speak of it. Halfway down the hall, a figure stood at attention, one of the royal protection officers. Not unusual, except his posture shifted slightly when he saw her, a subtle acknowledgement, a hesitation. Kate recognized him immediately. Sergeant Whitmore, reliable, discreet, a man who understood silence as both shield and burden. Your Royal Highness, he said quietly. Sergeant, she replied. He did not move, and that, too, was unusual. Is everything secure? She asked. Yes, ma'am. A pause. Then, carefully. There was an incident earlier. The word echoed like a stone dropped into still water. I am aware, Kate said evenly. Explain. Whitmore glanced down the corridor before speaking. Protocol etched into instinct. Her Majesty requested privacy with Princess Charlotte this afternoon. Staff were dismissed from the antechamber. Kate held his gaze. And there were raised voices. The sentence was precise. Measured. How raised? Audible beyond the threshold, ma'am. And no one intervened? He swallowed slightly. Protocol does not permit interruption of a senior royal audience unless physical distress is evident. Physical distress. The distinction felt surgical. Was there distress? Kate asked. Whitmore hesitated. Yes, ma'am. Kate's breath slowed. Why was I not informed? A longer pause now. Because no formal complaint was made. The machinery of hierarchy had already done its work. Silence becomes compliance. Kate stepped closer, lowering her voice. Sergeant, I am asking you not as a figurehead, but as a mother. Did you witness anything that concerns the welfare of my child? The guard's jaw tightened. I witnessed fear, he said. The corridor seemed to contract around them. Fear. Kate nodded once, slowly. Tomorrow night, she said, her voice steady as steel wrapped in velvet. After final rotation, meet me in the East Conservatory. Unofficially. Whitmore's eyes flickered, understanding the gravity of such a request. Yes, ma'am. She turned and walked back toward her chambers. But what followed next would not remain contained within nursery walls. Because within institutions built on endurance, questioning authority is not a domestic matter. It is structural. And tonight, a mother had begun to question. The camera drifts upward now, over the stone balustrades, past the sleeping gardens, into the dark London sky. Inside those walls, something subtle had shifted. Not scandal, not rebellion, but awareness. And awareness, in a monarchy defined by controlled narrative, is the most dangerous force of all. As Sergeant Whitmore prepares to speak beyond protocol, Kate senses that whatever unfolded behind that closed door may not only threaten Charlotte's peace, it may challenge the very architecture trussed inside the house itself. The courtyard was silent the next morning, but the echo of that word, fear, had not left her. Dawn settled gently over Kensington Palace, washing its brick facade in pale gold. From the outside, nothing appeared altered. Guards rotated on schedule. Vehicles entered through the secured gates. The palace breathed with its usual precision. Inside, however, Catherine moved differently, measured, alert. Charlotte had slept beside her through the night, one small hand resting against Kate's sleeve as if anchoring herself to certainty. By morning, the tears had dried. The composure had returned. But something quieter lingered, watchfulness. Kate kissed her daughter's forehead before the governess arrived. Today will be ordinary, she whispered, but she knew it would not be. Hours later, seated at her writing desk, Kate requested the daily internal brief. It arrived in its usual leather folio: schedules, visitor confirmations, staffing rotations, security summaries. Every movement within palace walls documented in clinical detail. She turned the pages slowly. There it was. Yesterday's timeline. 1410. Princess Charlotte dismissed from structured lessons. 1425. Private audience requested by Her Majesty. 1430. Antechamber cleared. Then nothing. No duration noted. No closing time recorded. The line simply resumed at 1458. Princess Charlotte escorted to private quarters. 28 minutes reduced to silence. Kate's fingers rested on the margin. In royal administration, absence is rarely accidental. She pressed the intercom. "Could I have Mr. Ashford, please?" Moments later, the senior private secretary entered, composed, courteous, immaculately neutral. "Your Royal Highness." "I have a small clarification," Kate began lightly. "Yesterday's audience between Her Majesty and Princess Charlotte. Why is there no recorded summary?" Ashford did not blink. "Private familial audiences are not routinely summarized, ma'am. Duration is usually logged. A clerical oversight, perhaps." The answer arrived too quickly. Kate closed the folio gently. "Please ensure that oversight is corrected." "Of course." He exited. The room felt colder. Meanwhile, behind the administrative facade of the palace, routines continued. Footmen prepared for an evening reception. Florists adjusted centerpieces. Equerries coordinated transport routes. The monarchy functions like a clockwork cathedral, ornate, disciplined, unyielding. And yet, beneath its arches, information flows through carefully guarded channels. Kate knew this. She had learned it over years of observation, how questions ripple, how alliances form quietly, how loyalty is tested not through declarations, but through restraint. By mid-afternoon, she had requested access to corridor security logs. Not footage, logs. A modest request. Even that triggered a procedural hesitation. The head of security, Colonel Reeves, arrived personally. "Your Royal Highness," he said with formal gravity. "May I ask the purpose of this inquiry?" "A maternal one," Kate replied calmly. He inclined his head. "Surveillance in private family corridors is limited by policy. I am aware. Reviewing archive footage requires written authorization from the Sovereign or the Prince of Wales." The structure was precise, layered, intentional. Kate stood slowly, walking toward the window that overlooked the gardens. "And if the welfare of a minor royal is concerned?" Reeves hesitated. "Then a safeguarding review may be initiated." "And who initiates that?" "A senior household member." "I see." The conversation ended there. But the message was clear. Access is not denied. It is deferred. Hours later, as dusk softened the palace edges, Kate walked alone toward the East Conservatory, the agreed meeting point. The conservatory stood apart from the main corridor network, a Victorian glass structure that housed rare orchids and citrus trees. At night, it felt suspended between eras, neither fully inside nor outside. Sergeant Whitmore was already waiting, at ease, but alert. "Thank you for coming," Kate said quietly. "It is my duty, ma'am." "Not tonight," she replied. "Tonight, I am asking you to step beyond it." He understood. The glass walls reflected faint lamplight as evening deepened. "Tell me what you witnessed," she said. Whitmore inhaled carefully. Her Majesty entered at 1427. Princess Charlotte appeared composed. When staff exited, the door was secured. "Secured?" "Yes, ma'am. Closed fully." And then, voices elevated within approximately 4 minutes. How elevated? Authoritative. Sharp. Kate did not interrupt. "I heard Her Majesty reference precedent," Whitmore continued, "and the phrase, 'future strength requires early correction.'" Kate's throat tightened almost imperceptibly. "Was my daughter reprimanded?" "Yes, ma'am." Harshly, Whitmore paused. By modern standards, the words lingered like dust suspended in air. And historically, within older royal pedagogy, perhaps not. There it was, the fracture between past and present. Kate stepped closer to one of the glass panels, watching her own reflection faintly merge with the darkened garden beyond. Did Charlotte appear distressed upon exit? Yes, ma'am. How so? Eyes red, posture rigid. She avoided eye contact. Avoided eye contact. A learned response. Why did no one report this? Whitmore's answer came slowly. Because no physical line was crossed. The conservatory seemed to narrow around them. Fear leaves no bruise, Kate said quietly. No, ma'am. Silence settled between orchids and polished stone. This is not about defiance, Kate continued. It is about boundaries. Whitmore met her gaze. I understand. Then understand this as well. If information is being filtered to preserve hierarchy at the expense of welfare, that hierarchy becomes fragile. A faint sound of wind brushed against the glass. Whitmore lowered his voice. There was also a 10-minute lapse in the corridor's active surveillance feed. Kate turned sharply. A lapse? Yes, ma'am. The system registered temporary maintenance. Scheduled? No. The word landed heavier than any Ray's voice. Maintenance. An unrecorded gap. Kate felt the architecture of the palace shift subtly in her mind. This was not an accident, she murmured. Whitmore did not answer. He did not need to. Elsewhere in the palace, conversations had already begun. Questions about Kate's inquiries moved quietly between offices. Why review logs? Why request clarification? Why disturb equilibrium? In institutions such as this, equilibrium is sacred. Later that evening, Camilla hosted a small dinner in the state dining room. Candles flickered against gilded frames. Laughter drifted through tall ceilings. To observers, nothing was amiss. But when Kate entered, poised and composed, the air shifted subtly. Camilla greeted her warmly. My dear, she said, voice smooth as silk. Charlotte seemed rather subdued this morning. I trust she is well? Kate held her gaze evenly. She is recovering. Recovering? Camilla echoed lightly. From instruction. The word hung delicately between them. Camilla's smile did not falter. Discipline is rarely comfortable. Nor should it be frightening, Kate replied softly. A pause, long enough to register. Then Camilla turned to greet another guest. The exchange lasted less than 15 seconds. But within it lay centuries of philosophy colliding. After dinner, Kate stood alone beneath a portrait of a young queen from another era. Stern, unyielding, immortalized in oil. She considered the inheritance of silence that traveled through generations. Strength was once forged through severity, emotion concealed, tears corrected. But what followed next would not remain confined to whispered reprimands, because within the machinery of monarchy, even minor breaches of protocol activate deeper mechanisms. The next morning, Kate submitted a formal request. Restricted corridor footage, safeguarding review, internal welfare assessment, small words, enormous implications. Within hours, quiet alarms began to ring inside administrative offices, not public alarms, institutional ones. And somewhere deep within those stone walls, the weight of the crown shifted, not visibly, not dramatically, but enough to unsettle those who believed tradition required no amendment. As Kate's request moves upward through layers of authority, a decision looms, one that will force loyalty, legacy, and motherhood into direct collision. The request had moved faster than anyone anticipated within the layered hierarchy of Kensington Palace. Paperwork rarely travels without resistance. It lingers. It circulates. It is softened by committee, but this time, the safeguarding review bore a signature that altered gravity. Catherine, and beneath it, quietly added in firm ink, William. The courtyard that morning appeared unchanged. A school vehicle arrived at the private gate. Staff bowed with measured precision. The facade of continuity held. Inside, however, conversations had sharpened. By midday, word reached Camilla, not through accusation, through inquiry. She received it in her sitting room, a modest chamber compared to grand state apartments, but lined with portraits of monarchs who had ruled through war, scandal, abdication, and reform. She read the memorandum once. Then again, safeguarding review concerning minor royal welfare, she murmured aloud. Her expression did not fracture. It settled. Hours later, Kate received a formal invitation. Private drawing room. 4 o'clock. The room chosen was deliberate. The blue drawing room. Formal, historic, rarely used for a personal discussion. Its walls bore silk panels faded by centuries of quiet negotiation. The fireplace mantel carried the weight of carved lions, symbols of authority and endurance. When Kate entered, Camilla was already seated. The door closed behind them. No aides, no recorders, only history observing. "My dear Catherine," Camilla began, voice steady, "I understand your concerns." Kate did not sit immediately. "I have responsibilities," she replied. Camilla inclined her head. "As do we all." Kate took the seat opposite her. Between them, a polished mahogany table reflected the filtered afternoon light. "This is about Charlotte," Kate said plainly. "Yes," Camilla answered. "It appears so." A silence followed, not awkward, but deliberate. Camilla folded her hands lightly. I corrected her. Kate's gaze remained unwavering. She describes it differently. "A child's interpretation is often emotional." "She is 9, Kate replied, not incapable. Camilla's expression sharpened almost imperceptibly. "Royal children," she said, "are not raised for ordinary futures. They are shaped." "And how?" Kate asked quietly. "Do you define shaping?" Camilla leaned back slightly, studying her. "There was laughter," she began. Excessive, unmeasured, in front of diplomatic guests. It reflected a lack of restraint. She laughed at a story about a corgi, Kate said evenly. She laughed without awareness of posture, presence, or consequence. Kate felt the words like a draft through an open window. "And so you isolated her?" "I spoke to her privately." "You dismissed staff?" "Because instruction requires focus." Kate's tone remained controlled. She left that room frightened. Camilla's eyes flickered. Fear is sometimes a teacher. The sentence lingered heavily in the air. Kate leaned forward slightly. "No," she said softly. "Fear is control." The temperature in the room seemed to drop by degrees. Camilla's voice hardened, though it never rose. For centuries, heirs have been taught discipline through firmness. The crown does not survive on comfort. "And yet," Kate replied, "it must survive in the present." Camilla stood then, crossing toward the window. "Do you believe I intended harm?" "I believe," Kate answered carefully, "that intention does not erase impact." Camilla turned back. "You are modern," she said, compassionate. The public adores that. But monarchy is not sustained by public affection alone. It is sustained by continuity. And continuity, Kate responded, cannot justify humiliation. The word hung sharply between them. Camilla's composure fractured for the first time. "Humiliation," she repeated. She was told tears are weakness. A long pause. "That is a historical fact," Camilla said. "It is outdated." The silence stretched. Somewhere beyond the heavy doors, footsteps passed. Life continued. But inside that room, two philosophies collided. Legacy versus evolution. Camilla returned to her chair. "Your safeguarding review," she said quietly, "suggests misconduct. It suggests examination. You question my judgment. I question the method." Camilla's gaze sharpened. "You risk division." Kate met her stare. "I risk silence if I do not." The room absorbed the weight of that truth. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the palace, Prince William had been briefed. He stood in his study, hands resting on the edge of his desk, reading the initial findings from the corridor logs. 10-minute surveillance lapse. Unscheduled maintenance code. Raised voices confirmed. No physical breach recorded. But something else caught his eye. A note. Small, nearly procedural. Her Majesty referenced precedent concerning early fortification of heirs. William exhaled slowly. He knew the language. He had grown up within it. Correction, restraint, fortification. He also remembered nights of silent endurance. Memory is not dramatic, but cold. He had accepted them as necessary. But now he was a father, and the equation felt different. Late afternoon sunlight filtered across his study floor as he considered the cost of confrontation. Institutional unity had always been paramount. Yet blood, his daughter's blood, redefined priority. By evening, he joined Kate in their private quarters. "How did it go?" he asked quietly. "She believes fear builds strength," Kate replied. William closed his eyes briefly. She cited precedent. She would. A pause. William moved toward the window overlooking the gardens. "When I was young," he said slowly, "there were expectations, corrections. We did not question them." "And did they make you stronger?" Kate asked. He hesitated. "They made me silent." The admission hovered in the room. Kate stepped closer. "I will not have Charlotte mistake silence for strength." William turned to face her. "Nor will I." The decision crystallized between them, without dramatic declaration, not rebellion, not defiance, but boundary. The next morning, Charlotte sat at the breakfast table, quieter than usual but attentive. William knelt beside her chair. "May I ask you something?" he said gently. She nodded. "When Grandmama spoke to you, did you feel respected?" Charlotte considered carefully, royal training already guiding her caution. "I felt small," she said at last. William's jaw tightened subtly. "No one," he replied softly, "should make you feel small." Across the palace, whispers had begun. Kate is asking questions. William has endorsed review. The balance is shifting. Camilla maintained public composure flawlessly. She attended engagements. She smiled beside dignitaries. She spoke of heritage and tradition with measured eloquence. But within private corridors, the air thickened, because for the first time, the correction of a child had become an institutional matter, not scandal, but precedent. Days later, a confidential memorandum surfaced, drafted months earlier, never filed. It referenced concerns from a senior aide regarding reintroduction of archaic disciplinary language in private instruction of minor royals. The language was careful, cautious, but clear. This had not been isolated. William read it twice, then once more. When he looked up, the weight of lineage rested heavily on his shoulders. He requested a closed meeting with senior advisors. Camilla was informed, not accused, informed. That evening, as dusk settled over the palace gardens, Kate stood alone in the same East Conservatory where the first truth had been spoken. The orchids were still, the air warm and fragrant. Sergeant Whitmore passed outside on rotation, offering the faintest nod. Loyalty had taken shape in quiet ways. Behind her, the palace loomed, magnificent, disciplined, immovable. And yet, something within it was being recalibrated, not through spectacle, through insistence, through a mother's refusal to normalize fear. Footsteps approached softly. William joined her. "It will not be simple," he said. "It was never meant to be," Kate replied. He looked through the glass toward the darkening sky. "If unity fractures, it must fracture honestly," she said. A long silence followed, because sometimes duty and blood stand on opposite sides of the same corridor, and choosing one reshapes the other. As William prepares to confront the institution itself, the question no longer lingers in whispers. It demands an answer that may redefine authority within the house. The palace did not tremble. It adjusted. In the days following private confrontation, the rhythm of Kensington Palace remained outwardly undisturbed. Carriages arrived on time. Engagements proceeded with polished ease. Public smiles held firm beneath camera flashes. But behind the stone walls, conversations had thinned into careful fragments. Staff spoke more softly. Doors closed more deliberately. Because a review, however discreet, changes the air inside an institution built on unspoken continuity. William's closed meeting with senior advisors convened in a panel council room seldom used for matters involving family. Its long oak table had witness war briefings, constitutional consultations, abdication tremors. Now it bore a different tension. Colonel Reeves presented the security findings with clinical restraint. Surveillance laps recorded at 1432. Maintenance override code entered manually. No external breach. "By whom?" William asked. Reeves hesitated. Authorization traced to an internal senior clearance. Silence tightened. Not illegal, but intentional. An unrecorded pocket of privacy created within a protected corridor. The prince's gaze moved to the thin document resting before him. The memorandum unearthed from archives, drafted 8 months prior, and signed, marked confidential. It read, in restrained administrative language, concern has been expressed regarding the reemergence of archaic corrective language in the private instruction of minor royals. Recommendation: review of safeguarding alignment with contemporary child welfare standards. It had never advanced beyond draft, never filed, never discussed. William tapped the edge of the paper once. Who suppressed this? He asked quietly. No one answered directly. In royal administration, suppression rarely leaves fingerprints. It leaves absences. Meanwhile, Charlotte's routine had shifted subtly. She withdrew from rehearsal for an upcoming youth engagement, a small but symbolic appearance alongside her parents. Officially, it was framed as fatigue. Unofficially, the palace tutors observed something else. Hesitation. During practice introductions, Charlotte's voice softened at the edges. When prompted to recite a brief prepared line, she paused, not from forgetfulness, but from caution. Kate watched from across the room as her daughter folded her hands precisely the way she had been instructed, posture flawless, smile measured, joy absent. After rehearsal, Kate knelt beside her. You needn't perform for me, she said gently. Charlotte looked down. I don't want to do it wrong again. The sentence was small, but it carried weight older than the corridor where it had first been spoken. Kate drew her close. There is no wrong in being yourself. Across the palace grounds, Camilla maintained her schedule without deviation. Public engagements continued with steady elegance. She attended a literacy initiative. She delivered remarks on preservation of heritage. She spoke of continuity, of resilience, of the necessity of strength in uncertain times. The irony was not lost on those listening carefully. In private, she requested her own briefing. The language in the memorandum unsettled her, not because it accused, but because it suggested reform. Reform implies fault, and monarchy does not acknowledge fault lightly. That evening, Camilla stood alone beneath a portrait of a former queen consort whose reign had weathered scandal and criticism. Firmness is not cruelty, she murmured to herself. Her generation had been shaped differently. Public scrutiny had carved resilience from humiliation. Tears had been contained because survival demanded it. To her, correction was protection. But what she had not anticipated was this: the modern lens, the idea that emotional welfare carries equal weight to ceremonial preparation. Meanwhile, William requested a private conversation with Kate. They met not in a drawing room, but in the quiet of their shared sitting space, a room less ornate, more human. He placed the memorandum between them. It predates this incident, he said. Kate read it slowly. This means, she whispered, Charlotte was not the first concern. William nodded. The burden of inherited silence pressed heavily now. I was raised to accept severity, he said after a long pause, to interpret it as necessity. And do you? Kate asked. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the window where the gardens lay shadowed in early dusk. I endured it, he said at last. But endurance is not the same as health. The distinction settled between them like a quiet revelation. Outside, the palace lamps flickered on. Inside, an older truth surfaced, one not written in memoranda, but carried generationally. Silence had preserved unity, but it had also preserved methods never re-examined. The safeguarding review expanded quietly, not public, not dramatic. Interviews conducted discreetly. Aides questioned in neutral tones. Staff asked to recount patterns rather than incidents. Several described language invoking strength through emotional discipline. None alleged abuse, but multiple noted discomfort. One junior aide, voice trembling, recalled hearing a child told that visible distress invited scrutiny. The pattern was subtle, cultural, institutional. Kate listened to each account with measured composure. The camera of memory moved slowly here, through long corridors at twilight, past polished floors reflecting chandeliers, into offices where documents sit unsigned. The hidden record was not explosive. It was cumulative, a mosaic of small silences. Charlotte's withdrawal deepened slightly over the next week. She did not cry again. She did not protest. She adapted, which frightened Kate more than tears ever had. One afternoon, During a quiet art session, Charlotte paused mid-brushstroke. "Mama?" she asked. "Yes." "If I become very strong, will people stop correcting me?" Kate set down her own brush. "Strength," she said softly, "is not the absence of correction. It is knowing when correction is fair." Charlotte considered this gravely. "And if it isn't?" "Then you speak." The word felt revolutionary in its simplicity. Speak. Across the palace, advisors compiled their internal summary. No legal breach. No violation of codified conduct. But clear misalignment with updated child welfare standards. The conclusion was careful. Recommendations included formalized guidelines on language, privacy boundaries, and safeguarding oversight during private instruction. In other words, limits. When the summary reached William's desk, he read it alone, then once more with Kate. "It is systemic," she said quietly. "Yes," he agreed. The issue extended beyond one afternoon. It traced backward into inherited philosophy. Later that evening, William requested an audience with Camilla. The meeting occurred in the same blue drawing room. This time, the tone was different, not accusatory, but final. "The review suggests structural reform," William began. Camilla listened without interruption. "You believe I endangered her," she said at last. "I believe," William replied evenly, "that methods once accepted no longer align with who we are becoming." "And who are you becoming?" she asked. "A father first," he answered. The statement did not carry defiance. It carried clarity. Camilla's gaze softened, though pride remained. "You risk weakening her." "I risk teaching her that silence is strength if I do nothing." The room absorbed the tension. Centuries of royal doctrine pressing against contemporary conscience. The hidden record had done its work, not by scandal, by illumination. Outside, rain began to fall softly against palace windows, a quiet percussion against ancient stone. Inside, William made a decision that would not reverse tradition entirely, but it would redraw its boundaries. With documented evidence now before him, William prepares to formalize a line that future generations will inherit, a line separating discipline from fear within the house itself. The rain had washed the stone clean by morning. From the upper windows of Kensington Palace, the gardens appeared renewed, hedges sharp, gravel paths rinsed pale, the air carrying that quiet clarity that follows a storm. Nothing in the facade suggested that an internal recalibration was about to take place. But inside, the council chamber had been prepared, not for ceremony, for boundary. The long oak table stood polished beneath soft overhead light. Leather-bound folders rested at each seat, their contents identical. Safeguarding review summary, advisory recommendations, draft amendments to internal household guidance. William entered first, not hurried, not theatrical, simply resolved. Moments later, senior advisors followed. Colonel Reeves, the private secretary, legal counsel, two long-serving household administrators whose institutional memories stretched back decades. Finally, Camilla entered, composed as ever, measured steps, neutral expression. If there was injury in her pride, it did not show. The doors closed. No press, no record, only precedent. William remained standing for a moment before speaking. "We are not gathered," he began calmly, "to assign blame." His voice carried neither heat nor hesitation. "We are here to clarify expectation." He allowed the words to settle. The safeguarding review has concluded there was no physical breach of conduct. However, it has identified language and methods inconsistent with our updated standards of child welfare. He did not look directly at Camilla when he said it. He did not need to. "Our children," he continued, "are heirs to history, but they are also children. That distinction must remain protected." Across the table, hands folded, pens remained still. Colonel Reeves cleared his throat lightly. The recommendations propose formal oversight for private instructional sessions involving minors. Additionally, a clear code regarding language that may induce emotional distress. Camilla's gaze shifted, cool but attentive. "Emotional distress," she repeated softly, "an expansive term." William met her eyes now. "It is precisely defined." A pause. The legal advisor opened one of the folders. Clause 3 establishes that no minor royal shall be subjected to isolation without a secondary adult present within immediate access. Clause 4 outlines prohibited phrasing that equates emotional expression with weakness. Silence thickened. Camilla spoke at last. "You are legislating tone." "No," William replied evenly. "We are safeguarding development." The distinction mattered. Outside the chamber windows, a breeze moved through the wet leaves. Inside, the weight of the crown felt almost visible, heavy, invisible architecture pressing down on the room. For centuries, correction had been inherited without written amendment. It passed through example, through expectation, through unchallenged repetition. Now it was being codified, not to dismantle tradition, but to refine it. Camilla leaned back slightly. "You believe this strengthens a monarchy?" she asked. "I believe it strengthens those who must carry it," William answered. The sentence held quiet finality. The advisors exchanged brief glances, not of scandal, but of recognition. A generational pivot rarely announces itself loudly. It moves through rooms like this. Measured, formal, irreversible. After further discussion, minor language adjustments, procedural clarifications, the document was placed before William for signature. He did not rush. He read each line again, then signed, ink against paper, a boundary made tangible. Camilla did not object further, but her stillness carried its own gravity. When the meeting adjourned, she rose with composure intact. As she passed William, she paused briefly. "You have chosen your era," she said quietly. He inclined his head. "And my daughter." The corridor outside felt longer than usual as attendees dispersed. No one spoke above a whisper. The palace had not fractured. It had shifted. Meanwhile, Kate waited in a smaller, sitting room overlooking the east lawn. The morning light illuminated framed photographs, family moments unguarded by ceremony. When William entered, she did not ask immediately. She read his face. "It's done," he said simply. She exhaled, not triumphantly, but steadily. "What was the tone?" she asked. "Measured." And her response, "Contained." Kate nodded. There would be no public statement, no outward signal of conflict. The monarchy does not expose its internal recalibrations. But inside those walls, a line now existed. And lines, once drawn, alter behavior. Later that afternoon, Charlotte returned from lessons carrying a sketchbook. She entered the sitting room cautiously, an echo of recent days still visible in her posture. William knelt to her level. "May we speak for a moment?" She nodded. "We have made something clear today," he said gently. "No one may make you feel small in the name of strength." Charlotte's eyes searched his face for certainty. "And if they try?" "They won't," Kate answered softly from beside them. Charlotte considered this. Then, slowly, she smiled, not the rehearsed public smile, but something lighter. Relief does not always arrive dramatically. Sometimes it arrives as posture softening, as breath returning. Across the palace grounds, Sergeant Whitmore stood at his post near the private wing entrance. The afternoon rotation proceeded as usual. He had not expected acknowledgement, yet an envelope awaited him in the security office at shift's end. Inside, a brief note. "Your discretion and integrity are recognized. Loyalty to truth preserves more than protocol." And signed, but unmistakable. He folded it carefully and placed it in his jacket. Order had been restored, not through exposure, through internal correction. In the days that followed, subtle changes became visible. Private instructional sessions were adjusted to include an aid within reach. Language softened, not into indulgence, but into balance. Charlotte resumed rehearsal for her engagement. This time, when she practiced her lines, her voice carried steadiness without strain. During the public appearance, cameras flashed as expected. Observers noted her composure, her clarity, her warmth. They did not see the corridor that had nearly reshaped her confidence. They saw only continuity. That is how monarchy survives, by resolving storms before they reach the gates. One evening, as twilight settled again over the palace, Kate walked alone to the East Conservatory. The orchid stood unchanged. Glass panes reflected the fading sky. She paused where she had first asked Sergeant Whitmore to speak beyond protocol. How easily silence could have prevailed. How easily a child might have learned that fear was instruction. The crown endures because it adapts. But adaptation requires someone willing to absorb tension, to risk misunderstanding, to draw a line quietly and stand by it. Footsteps approached behind her. "William, it will not be the last adjustment," he said softly. "It never is," she replied. He glanced toward the palace. "Unity feels different now." "Stronger?" she asked. "Honest." They stood together in silence. No triumph, no resentment, just recalibrated equilibrium. Beyond the glass, the city lights flickered alive. Inside those ancient walls, tradition had not been dismantled. It had been refined. And Charlotte, asleep upstairs, no longer feared the sound of her own laughter. As the palace resumes its polished rhythm, a quieter truth remains, that strength without compassion fractures, and legacy without protection cannot endure. The palace was quiet now. Kensington Palace had returned to its habitual rhythm. Guards walked familiar routes. Chandeliers glimmered under the soft glow of afternoon light, and the hum of life carried on through corridors both public and private. To any observer, nothing had changed. But within those walls, the echoes of the past week lingered, subtle, profound, unavoidable. Catherine moved slowly along the East Conservatory, the glass panes reflecting both her face and the fading light of the afternoon sky. The orchids she passed were as vibrant as ever, yet she could not help but see them as metaphors. Delicate yet resilient, nurtured carefully within structures designed to contain them, yet always reaching toward the sun. Her thoughts returned to Charlotte, the little girl who had cried in corridors that should have offered sanctuary, who had learned too quickly the weight of expectation. Charlotte, whose laughter had once been deemed reckless, whose tears had been considered weakness, was now recovering something far more essential: assurance. The knowledge that within the walls of her home, within the circle of her family, her voice, her feelings, and her dignity mattered. Kate paused, resting her hand on the cool glass. She thought of the hidden record, the memorandum never filed, the lapses in protocol, the silence that had for so long allowed outdated methods to endure unchallenged. That silence had been powerful, but so too had been the courage to confront it quietly, deliberately, beyond mere motherhood. This was leadership, the kind that does not announce itself, does not seek applause, the kind that bends centuries of expectation toward a single guiding principle: protection of the vulnerable. William joined her, walking softly on the stone floor. He did not speak immediately, instead looking out at the gardens where early shadows gathered. "Do you ever wonder," he asked finally, "how much of the crown's history is written in silence?" Kate followed his gaze. "All of it," she said. "And how much of it should have been spoken?" A pause, filled only by the distant rustle of leaves and the faint echo of steps along the stone corridors. "The truth," William continued, "is that legacy can feel like a burden. Tradition can weigh heavier than expectation. But the strength of it, the part that endures, is only real when humanity is preserved alongside it." Kate nodded. Her mind traced the corridor whispers, the raised voices, the tense negotiation, and finally the line drawn with ink and quiet authority. "It is not about dismantling tradition," she said softly. "It is about honoring it correctly." They turned back toward the palace interior. Upstairs, Charlotte slept, her chest rising and falling evenly, her small hands curled around the edge of her blanket. She no longer feared correction. She no longer equated vulnerability with shame. Within these walls, she was learning that integrity and compassion can coexist even under the weight of the crown. In the weeks that followed, life resumed its public cadence. Engagements continued, formal events were attended, and the cameras recorded only what the monarchy allowed: composure, elegance, continuity. But within private quarters, subtle transformations unfolded. Staff spoke more openly, aware that oversight now included both accountability and ethical consideration. Private instruction incorporated sensitivity, without compromise. And Charlotte, resilient, intelligent, perceptive, learned the quiet power of speaking and being heard. Kate often reflected on the paradox she now carried in her mind: that institutions built on endurance and hierarchy can protect or they can harm, depending on how silence is wielded. For centuries, silence had been wielded as a tool of conformity and control. But in the hands of courage and compassion, silence could be broken without chaos, with dignity intact. Even the walls seemed to remember. The echo of past discipline, the whispers of previous generations, had softened. They now bore witness to measured reform, to lessons taught without fear, to power tempered by conscience. William and Kate walked together through the corridor that had first revealed the fracture. They did not need to speak. Their presence alone was a testament to choice, to vigilance, to love that defies the inertia of protocol. And somewhere within the palace, Charlotte's laughter finally returned. Unguarded, spontaneous, joyous. A quiet affirmation that even under the weight of centuries, innocence and courage could coexist. The crown, as always, endured. But beneath it, the echoes had changed. Not erased, not silenced, but transformed. A reminder that legacy is not preserved merely through ritual, ceremony, or hierarchy, but through vigilance, protection, and the courage to act rightly, even when history seems immovable. Outside, London moved on. The city's pulse did not pause for royalty. Yet within these walls, lessons have been carved quietly, irrevocably, and with care that would ripple far beyond the corridors where they had first begun. Kate paused at the window one last time, gazing at the city below. She understood something profound. Even institutions built on endurance are only as strong as the humanity within them, and the courage protected, even quietly, defines the true legacy of the crown.